Nobody in that courtroom expected the maid to be the reason the trial started at all. Not the lawyers, not the bailiffs. And certainly not Ariana Cole, the billionaire's daughter, who was about to learn that the woman she fired without a second thought had a name everyone in that building already knew. Just not as the maid. Hey, welcome back. Before we get into tonight's story, tell me where you're watching from and drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. This one's about power, about assumptions, and about what happens when the person you dismiss the fastest turns out to be the one holding the room the whole time. Stay till the end, because the moment that judge walked in changed everything. Her name was Elena Marsh, 34 years old. For the past 8 months, she had worked as a live-in housekeeper for the Cole family, one of the wealthiest names in Chicago. Old construction money turned into a real estate empire that stretched across 4 states. Elena kept to herself. She showed up early, left late, folded towels into perfect thirds, and never once raised her voice no matter how she was spoken to. And in the Cole household, she was spoken to plenty. The man of the house, Richard Cole, barely noticed the staff. He was rarely home, buried in boardrooms and deal closings. His daughter Ariana, 26, was a different story entirely. Ariana had grown up being told no by nobody. Private schools, a trust fund before she could walk, and a habit of treating every person who worked in her orbit like furniture that occasionally needed correcting. Elena had seen women like Ariana before. She didn't take it personally. She had learned, a long time ago, that the loudest people in a room are rarely the ones who actually decide what happens in it. What nobody in the Cole household knew was that before Elena wore an apron, she wore a robe. The kind with a gavel resting a few feet away. Before she scrubbed floors for a paycheck, she had spent 11 years as a licensed attorney, and before that, 3 years clerking for a federal judge who used to tell her, "The law doesn't care how loud you are in the room. It cares whether you're right." Nobody at the Cole estate knew that 6 years ago, Elena Marsh had walked away from all of it. The firm, the title, the corner office. After a case that broke something in her she still hadn't fully repaired. She hadn't touched a legal brief since. She told herself the quiet work of cleaning houses was penance, or peace, or both. She hadn't decided which yet. 3 weeks before the day everything changed, Ariana Cole discovered her engagement ring was missing from her nightstand. She didn't ask questions. She didn't check the safe, the other drawer, or the jacket she'd worn to dinner the night before. She simply marched downstairs, found Elena polishing the banister, and said the words that would end up costing her far more than a ring ever could. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for theft." Elena set down her cloth slowly. "Miss Cole, I haven't touched your ring." "I don't care what you say," Ariana snapped, loud enough that 2 other staff members froze in the hallway. "People like you always say that. Get out, now." Elena didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded, gathered the small bag she kept by the service entrance, and walked out the front door of a house she would never set foot in again. At least, not as staff. What Ariana didn't know, what nobody in that house had ever bothered to find out in 8 months, was that Elena Marsh's name was still on file with the Cook County Bar Association. Still active. Still respected by exactly the kind of people who would remember it the moment they heard it again. 2 days after being fired, Elena received a call she hadn't expected in 6 years. A former colleague, now a sitting judge, needed a favor. A federal civil case, corporate fraud, embezzlement, the kind of complicated financial trail most attorneys wouldn't touch. Needed outside counsel with almost no notice. Someone with a spotless record and no conflict of interest. Someone exactly like Elena Marsh. She almost said no. She had promised herself, after everything, that she was done with courtrooms. But there was a detail in the case file that made her stop cold, sitting in her small apartment with the phone still warm against her ear. The defendant named in the fraud case was Cole Property Holdings LLC, Richard Cole's company, and in 3 weeks, the very people who had thrown Elena out onto the street, without so much as an apology, were going to walk into a courtroom expecting a stranger behind the plaintiff's table. They had no idea it would be her. The 3 weeks that followed moved differently for Elena than they ever had in that quiet house on Lakeshore. She woke before dawn again, not to start someone else's laundry, but to comb through financial disclosures until her eyes burned. She hadn't felt this particular kind of tired in 6 years. The good kind. The kind that came from using a part of her mind she'd forced into hibernation. The case was worse than the initial file suggested. Cole Property Holdings had been quietly funneling investor funds through shell entities for the better part of 3 years, dressing up losses as reinvestments, paying early investors with money pulled from new ones. It wasn't just fraud. It was the textbook definition of it, the kind law students study for decades. Dozens of retirees had put their pensions into coal developments that existed only on paper. One elderly investor, a former schoolteacher named Dorothy Vance, had lost her entire retirement savings, nearly $340,000, into a luxury waterfront project that was, in reality, an empty lot with a chain-link fence around it. Elena read Dorothy's deposition twice. Something about the woman's plain, unembellished grief, no theatrics, just quiet devastation, reminded her exactly why she'd become a lawyer in the first place and exactly why she'd once let herself walk away. Richard Cole, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was coming for him personally. He'd handed the entire matter to his legal team weeks ago, with the same detachment he handled everything. A problem to be managed, not a life to be answered for. He was more concerned, that particular week, with his daughter's engagement gala than with a civil suit he assumed. His lawyers would quietly settle before it ever saw daylight. Ariana, for her part, hadn't thought about Elena Marsh once since the day she fired her. The ring, as it turned out, had been sitting exactly where she'd left it, inside her gym bag, forgotten after a spa day. She never mentioned this to anyone. She certainly never considered calling Elena to apologize. Women like that, she told herself, moved on, found other houses. It wasn't her problem. She was, at that moment, far more focused on seating charts and floral arrangements for the engagement party her father had insisted on throwing at their Lake Forest estate. 300 guests, half of Chicago's old money, and every reporter from the society pages who mattered. What Ariana didn't know was that her father's lawyers, in a private meeting 2 days before the gala, had just been informed of exactly who was representing the plaintiffs in the largest fraud case Cole Holdings had ever faced. Elena Marsh, one of the senior partners, said, reading from a printed brief, visibly uneasy. She used to be at Whitfield and Marsh before she left the profession. She's sharp, she's clean, and she doesn't lose. We need to talk about settlement numbers before this goes any further. Richard Cole barely looked up from his phone. Never heard of her. Handle it. He had no idea the same woman had spent 8 months making his bed. The court date was set for the Monday following the engagement gala. A scheduling coincidence nobody at Cole Holdings had bothered to flag as significant, because nobody had connected the dots. Elena had asked her colleague, the judge who'd first called her, to keep her involvement quiet until the hearing. Not out of pride. Out of something closer to instinct. She wanted to see their faces when they realized. The night before the hearing, Elena sat at her small kitchen table. The same table where she used to eat dinner alone after 12-hour shifts, scrubbing floors that weren't hers, and read through her closing argument one final time. She thought about Dorothy Vance's plain, steady voice in that deposition. She thought about the 8 months of "Yes, Miss Cole," and of course Miss Cole she had swallowed without complaint. She thought about the exact words Ariana had used the day she was fired. People like you always say that, and, for the first time in 6 years, Elena Marsh let herself feel something other than quiet resignation. She felt ready. Monday morning, the Cook County courthouse filled with reporters, investors, and the kind of tense, overdressed silence that only accompanies people about to lose a great deal of money in public. Richard Cole sat at the defendant's table in a suit that cost more than most of the plaintiff's annual pensions, flanked by 4 attorneys who kept glancing nervously toward the door. Ariana had come too. Not out of concern for the case, which she barely understood, but because her father had asked her to sit behind him and look supportive for the small cluster of photographers outside. She sat in the front row, scrolling her phone, entirely unbothered. At exactly 7 a.m., the side door near the plaintiff's table opened. A woman walked in wearing a charcoal suit, a leather folder under one arm, her hair pulled back the same tight, practical way it always had been. Except this time, there was no apron, no cleaning cart, no lowered eyes. Ariana looked up from her phone out of pure boredom, glanced toward the plaintiff's table, and felt every ounce of color drain from her face. It was Elena. For a moment, Ariana genuinely believed she was hallucinating. The woman standing at the plaintiff's table, adjusting a leather folder with the calm precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times, could not possibly be the same person who used to fold her towels into thirds and disappear silently down the servants' staircase. But it was her. Same sharp jaw. Same steady eyes that never seemed to blink first. Except now those eyes were scanning the defendant's table with the unmistakable focus of someone who already knew exactly how this was going to end. Richard Cole leaned toward his lead attorney, jaw tight. That's her? That's Marsh? The attorney nodded once, not looking away from the plaintiff's table. That's her, sir. Ariana's mouth had gone dry. She grabbed her father's sleeve, whispering with none of the composure she usually performed for cameras. "Dad, that's the maid. That's Elena. The one I know who she is." Richard cut in, low and sharp, though the flicker of confusion on his face suggested he was only now piecing together what his daughter had done 8 months ago and what it might now cost him. The bailiff called the room to order. Elena Marsh rose from her seat, buttoned her jacket, and walked to the podium without so much as a glance toward the Cole family. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, and carried easily to every corner of the courtroom. Nothing like the quiet, deferential tone Ariana remembered from the hallway of her father's mansion. "Your Honor, this case is not complicated," Elena began. "It is the story of a company that took money from people who trusted it, and used that money to fund a lifestyle it had no right to. I intend to show, plainly and with the company's own records, exactly how that happened, and exactly who it happened to." She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Every word landed with the precision of someone who had spent 11 years learning exactly how much force a sentence needed, and not a fraction more. Over the next 2 hours, Elena walked the court through bank transfers, shell company filings, and investor statements with a clarity that made even the judge lean forward slightly in his seat. She called Dorothy Vance to the stand first, deliberately, strategically, and let the retired schoolteacher explain, in her own plain words, what it felt like to lose $340,000 meant to carry her through the rest of her life. "I trusted the name on the building," Dorothy said quietly. Everyone trusted the name on the building. By the time Elena finished her direct examination, 2 jurors were visibly wiping their eyes, and Richard Cole's lead attorney had stopped taking notes altogether, staring instead at the growing pile of documents stacked neatly in front of the plaintiff's table. During the recess, Ariana followed Elena into the hallway outside the courtroom, half out of disbelief, half out of the same reflexive instinct that had made her bark orders at staff her entire life. "You could have told me," Ariana said, arms crossed, voice tight. "You let me fire you. You let me think." "I didn't let you do anything, Miss Cole," Elena said evenly, not stopping her stride toward the water fountain. "You made a decision in about 4 seconds without asking a single question. That wasn't something I controlled. I could have." Ariana started, then stopped, unsure herself what she meant to say. Apologized? Rehired her? Believed her? Elena studied her for a long moment, and for the first time something almost like pity crossed her expression. "You know what the strangest part of working in your house was, Miss Cole? It wasn't the 12-hour days. It wasn't even the accusation. It was realizing that in 8 months, you never once asked me a single question about myself. Not where I was from. Not what I did before. Nothing. You looked at the uniform and decided you already knew everything worth knowing." Ariana had no answer for that. She stood in the hallway, suddenly aware of exactly how small her assumptions had been, and watched Elena walk back into the courtroom without waiting for a response. Back inside, Richard Cole's attorneys requested an emergency recess to discuss settlement. The judge granted 15 minutes. In the small conference room down the hall, Richard sat across from his own legal team, tie loosened, staring at numbers that had, in the span of a single morning, gone from manageable to catastrophic. "She's going to bury us," one attorney said flatly. "The Vance testimony alone." "I know what the Vance testimony did," Richard snapped. He rubbed his eyes, and for the first time in years, something like real fear crept into his voice. "Get me a number. Whatever it takes to end this today." Nobody in that room said what everyone was thinking, that 8 months ago, this entire outcome could have been avoided, with something as simple as an apology and a rehire. That the woman about to determine how many millions Richard Cole would lose had once been fired over a ring found later in a gym bag. Back in the courtroom, Elena Marsh sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, reviewing her notes, entirely unaware, or entirely unbothered, that 15 feet away, the most powerful man in the room was quietly falling apart. The judge would return in 10 minutes. And when he did, everyone in that courtroom, including Ariana Cole, was about to find out exactly how much it costs to underestimate the wrong person. The judge would return in 10 minutes. He returned in 8. The courtroom rose as Judge Harold Whitby entered, a stern, silver-haired man known throughout Cook County for 2 things: an almost photographic memory for case law, and zero patience for stalling tactics from well-funded defendants. "I understand the defense has requested time to discuss settlement," Judge Whitby said, taking his seat, glasses perched low on his nose as he glanced toward the Cole table. "Counsel, where do we stand?" Richard Cole's lead attorney rose, straightening his jacket with the kind of forced composure that fooled no one in the room. "Your Honor, my client would like to propose a settlement figure to the plaintiffs, to be discussed privately with opposing counsel." Judge Whitby's eyes moved to Elena. Miss Marsh? Elena rose slowly, folder in hand, and for a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath waiting for her answer. She had spent 8 months learning exactly how the Cole family operated. The deflection. The assumption that money could quietly resolve anything. The belief that an apology was a luxury they were never required to offer. Your Honor, my clients are willing to hear a settlement offer, Elena said evenly. But I want to be clear for the record. This isn't only about the money my clients lost. Dorothy Vance didn't just lose $340,000. She lost the ability to retire with dignity after 31 years teaching 3rd grade. No settlement figure fixes that entirely, but a fair one, paired with full transparency about how this fraud was structured, would be a start. Richard Cole's attorney glanced at his client. Richard, jaw clenched, gave a single, tight nod. We're prepared to offer full restitution to all affected investors, the attorney said, plus punitive damages, to be determined jointly with plaintiff's counsel, along with a public statement acknowledging fault. A ripple moved through the gallery. Reporters in the back row began typing rapidly. Elena didn't smile, didn't react at all beyond a small, measured nod. We'll review the figures, she said, but I want it on record that my clients expect this resolved by end of week, not dragged into another 6 months of legal maneuvering. Understood, the attorney said quietly. Judge Whitby looked between both tables, then allowed himself the smallest, driest note of amusement. Well, that's the fastest I've seen a company go from "we'll fight this" to full restitution in 22 years on this bench. I'll take it. Court is adjourned pending settlement terms to be filed by Friday. The gavel came down, and just like that it was over, or at least the public part of it was. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions at both legal teams. Elena moved through them calmly, offering only a brief, professional statement about her client's relief and the importance of accountability for corporate fraud. She said nothing about the Cole family personally. She didn't need to. The cameras had already caught Richard Cole's ashen face as he exited through a side door. Avoiding the crowd entirely, Ariana lingered near the courthouse entrance long after her father had already left in the town car, unsure why she hadn't followed him. She found Elena near the parking structure, keys in hand, about to leave. Wait, Ariana called out, jogging slightly to catch up. I wanted to say something. Elena stopped, unreadable, waiting. Ariana exhaled, and for the first time since Elena had known her, something in her voice cracked slightly. The polish gone. I was wrong. About the ring. About all of it. I didn't even look for it before She stopped, swallowed. I'm sorry. Elena studied her for a long moment, not coldly. Just carefully, the way she used to study witnesses on the stand, searching for what was real underneath the words. I believe you're sorry right now, Elena said finally. Standing here, in front of the cameras, after your father's company just lost $12 million in a single morning. I hope it's still true tomorrow, when there's no one watching. Ariana flinched, but didn't argue. What can I do? To actually fix it, I mean. Not just say sorry. Elena considered the question longer than Ariana expected. Dorothy Vance is 78 years old. She taught 3rd grade for 31 years and trusted your family's name with her retirement. When the settlement comes through, that's the woman I'd start with. Not because a judge ordered it, because you decided to. She didn't wait for a response. She simply nodded once, got into her car, and drove away, leaving Ariana standing alone in the parking structure with the first genuinely uncomfortable feeling she'd experienced in 26 years of never having to sit with one. 3 days later, the settlement was finalized. Full restitution, plus an additional 20% in punitive damages, distributed to 41 investors across 6 states. Dorothy Vance received a call from Elena personally. Not Richard Cole's office, not a lawyer, but Elena herself, confirming her funds would be fully restored within the week. I don't even know how to thank you, Dorothy said, her voice thick. You don't need to, Elena told her. You just need to enjoy the retirement you already earned. That evening, Elena sat once more at her small kitchen table, the same one where she used to eat dinner alone after scrubbing floors that weren't hers. Except this time, the quiet felt different. Not like penance. Like something closer to peace, finally actually earned. 6 weeks later, Elena Marsh received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note and a check made out to the Dorothy Vance Community Scholarship Fund. A program Elena hadn't set up herself, but had mentioned once, in passing, to a reporter as the kind of thing that should exist for people like Dorothy. The note was short. You said I should start with Dorothy. I did. Then I kept going. Thank you for not letting me get away with being who I was. AC Elena read it, twice. then set it down on the kitchen table she still hadn't replaced, next to a stack of case files that had, almost without her noticing, started piling up again. In the 2 months since the Cole case settled, word had spread quickly through Chicago's legal circles. Not just about the verdict, but about the woman behind it. 3 former colleagues had already reached out. One firm had offered her a partnership on the spot. She hadn't said yes to anything yet, but for the first time in 6 years, she hadn't said no either. Dorothy Vance, for her part, used a portion of her restored retirement to fund a small classroom library at the elementary school where she'd once taught. New books, new shelves, and a small plaque near the door that read simply, "For the students who deserve to be believed in." She never mentioned Elena's name on the plaque. She didn't need to. Elena had asked her not to. As for the Cole family, the fallout extended well beyond the courtroom. Richard Cole stepped back from day-to-day operations at Cole Holdings within the year, handing control to an outside compliance board mandated by the settlement terms. It wasn't ruin. He remained wealthy, remained comfortable. But the empire he'd built on quiet assumptions and unquestioned trust never fully recovered its reputation. Ariana changed more than anyone expected her to. She didn't become someone unrecognizable overnight. That never happens in real life. And Elena, of all people, understood that better than most. But she started asking questions, real ones. About the people who worked in her father's houses, about where they came from, about what they'd done before a uniform made them invisible to her. 6 months after the trial, she enrolled in law school, not because she suddenly wanted to be Elena Marsh, but because, for the first time, she wanted to understand exactly what it meant to actually earn respect, instead of assuming it. She and Elena never became close. That kind of clean, tidy redemption only exists in the stories people tell to make themselves feel better. But once a year, on the anniversary of the verdict, Ariana sent a donation to Dorothy's scholarship fund. No note, no cameras. Just a quiet gesture from someone who had finally learned that the loudest apology in the world means nothing if it isn't followed by something quieter and more permanent. Elena kept the handwritten note from Ariana in the same drawer where she kept her old bar association card. 2 small proofs, side by side, that people are rarely only one thing, not the maid who says nothings, not the heiress who never has to. People change, sometimes only a little, sometimes only once, but sometimes that's enough to matter. Here's the truth this story leaves us with. You never really know who's standing in front of you until you take the time to ask. The person folding your towels might have once argued cases in federal court. The person you dismiss in 4 seconds might be the only one in the room capable of teaching you something real. If this story moved you tonight, if it reminded you that dignity isn't something you can read off a uniform, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And share it with someone who needs the reminder that everyone deserves to be asked one more questions before they're judged. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding all the power.